for joining me on Ride with Joe, your fractional marketing technology and data strategy expert. So today we're going to take a ride to the Toronto West Rail Path, and we're going to talk about today's topic, CDPs, customer data platforms. And it's going to be my take on an often confusing category of software, if we can call it that. Spoiler alert, I don't think you actually need one, so I'll explain why. So CDPs. There's been a lot written about and talked about what they are, how to define them, and it's often quite an academic discussion. I think that's part of the problem. So my perspective is in terms of what I've seen in terms of actually implementing CDP and CDP-like things in the real world, whether it's an enterprise or sometimes organizations a bit smaller, which was the case with most recent client that asked me to talk about CDPs and help them with their selection process. So it was a non-profit actually. And so they were jumping on the CDP bandwagon, probably a bit late, and I think they had maybe what I would say is the first iteration of academically how experts were defining what a CDP is, and I put it under the category of a package CDP. We've since kind of moved on to different categories. Composable was something for a while, and more recently we're into systems of context, thanks to our good friend Scott Brinker coming up with coining these new terms, and that's kind of been the history of this product category, is very academic and always just kind of almost like a chameleon, almost like morphing into whatever it is that's the hot topic of the day. Of course, all roads lead to AI and agents these days, and it's no surprise that CDPs are being framed in that perspective, from that perspective these days as well. In terms of this nonprofit client, I think they were kind of in a perspective where they're looking at some of the promises of the traditional package CDP. So that's where they were coming from. And if you don't already know, there's really kind of three components that are described as part of that. There's the getting stuff in, the ingestion. There's some type of unification where you might be building things like golden customer records. You might be doing some segmentation. And then there's kind of the engagement piece at the end. So how do I connect with other channels and so on? And that was kind of the traditional kind of message behind the CDP. So we're just arriving here at the Toronto West Path. There's a bit of construction here, so we'll mostly reopened. So we'll just need to kind of dance around that. And dancing is something that if you're a salesperson trying to sell a CDP, that's definitely something you'd need to do, because for myself, I was been working in MarTech data strategy for 20 years now. We're measuring in decades, and the CDP, I struggled to understand what it was supposed to be and how it was different from other things that were already in the enterprise or in other organizations. And it looked a heck of a lot like things that I was already familiar with. Whether that was within MarTech tools, whether it was within the data warehouse, or of course what we're calling these days data lakes and lake houses and all those cool things. So I always found it kind of confusing, but I think it's something that's had to evolve. And so more recently we've seen kind of this new definition of what it is, and that's the composable piece, composable CDPs, which I have a real problem with. And I think it's a departure from that original package CDP vision and kind of the intent behind that. And so what I mean by that is if you think about even just the word composable, right? It's another word for that might be modularity, having sometimes people use the term Lego bricks. If you think about who likes that type of language or who's constantly looking for something like that, it's usually not marketers. It's usually developers, architects, people that work close or inside of centralized IT teams. Classic example is, take a look at, log into the AWS console. I know you haven't if you're a marketer, but I'll tell you about it. If you go in there, we're just going to do a quick detour here. We're doing an AWS detour as I'm doing this as well. What you would see is a lot of services that are totally decoupled, and you have no expectation to use any more than one. There's many people that, many organizations that just use one service. It's very modular, it's very composable. That's what a computer scientist, engineer, developer likes. And so when I see CDPs being framed as the benefit is, this composability, and they start talking about APIs, well, hang on, what happened to the core message here, which was, I thought this was about empowering marketers. I thought this was about, reducing time to market, about not having to rely on it. Just sounds like another IT tool. And so that's kind of the challenge I have with that. The latest evolution, I'm not going to pretend to understand it. It's even more academic, but there's these systems of context. Is the new language we're seeing. We're seeing agents, and okay, well, that might be something, but it doesn't relate to much of anything that I've seen in the real world. Just like this jackhammer here that we're going to have to and detour. Hopefully we can just get away from these sounds for a bit here. Just a work in progress right now. Our beautiful West Rail path. So systems of context, agents for marketers, definitely a work in progress as well. So at this point, it's kind of firmly in the realm of academia, I would say. So as you can probably tell by now, I'm not really a big fan of CDPs. I've struggled to define them since the beginning, and anytime I do see them in the field, I'm usually decommissioning them or ignoring them or taking a portion of what was implemented and kind of salvaging whatever was gleaned from that and putting it into some other system, whether it's a large marketing technology suite. Think about a Salesforce or Adobe suite, wrapping it into that because, of course, they have CDP-like functions, or really just taking advantage of the existing infrastructure that the client has around their warehouse or data lake, lakehouse, whatever you want to call it. Kind of more that centralized infrastructure there. So kind of a gloomy perspective, skeptical take on CDPs, I'll admit. So, where does that leave us? We're going to jump back. Where's the salvation? As I'm looking for a kind of a re-entry point to the West Rail path here, what's the salvation here? How do we get back to those ethos of what was the point of the CDP in the first place? So for me, it was CDPs definitely were a response at some point to a legitimate itch by marketers. So usually we're talking CMO or someone reporting into the CMO, so VP of marketing channels, that sort of role, and their itch was pretty straightforward, and it's one that's it's been around forever, and it's what I built my career on, which is marketers just don't want to wait for centralized IT. They want to have autonomy. They want to reduce time to market. They want greater control because they have the reality of, well, okay, the business strategy just changed last week, or our campaigns are no longer performing, or the business reality just changed, so we need to turn on a dime. And of course, centralized IT teams, they just don't operate that way. They're building for the future. They're building for modularity. They're building for reusability. All those very useful things, especially for marketers. So there's that mismatch. There's that incongruence, and CDPs were supposed to scratch that itch, and and where I found it most popular is when there's a marketing leader who is extremely frustrated with their centralized IT team. And when that happens, they are looking for a panacea. They're looking for a way of saying, well, I'm struggling to get what I need from these other teams, these centralized IT teams. Why don't we just cut them out? Let me purchase a large subscription here to a software as a service, maybe independent CDP vendor, and let's see what we can do in 6 months. Let's see what we can do in a year. And that's a common reaction. And I can, I have total empathy and can sympathize with that type of decision. It makes total sense. However, I don't see a lot of value from going that route. It can be reactionary, and I just don't see marketers that are winning from making that decision. And so my take is, if you have that itch for, especially what a package CDP was supposed to stand for, what those benefits would be, look at alternatives. Look at ways of essentially leveraging and investing in what you already have. And in my case, that's where I've been able to help. That's where I've been able to kind of move the needle on many occasions. And so what does that look like? Part of it is sometimes just an acknowledgement and an understanding of investments that have already been made by that centralized IT team. Usually with the right conversations, they are happy to share and happy to proactively find ways, creatively find ways to leverage the investments they've already made. Nobody wants to build something that's intended for reusability, it's intended to solve a number of use cases, and it just sits on the shelf. Nobody wants that. The challenge is finding ways to unlock that and to find ways of getting value from that. Okay, so what are your choices here? If you've got that shiny new budget that came in, your boss says, hey, we got some money to burn on a CDP. Should you do it? Should you spend that, whatever it is, $100,000 annually on software as a service subscriptions? You're going to need some professional services for that as well. You can definitely do that. Throw caution into the wind. Just, see what you can get out of that initial pilot. See what you can get after a year. Or you can build bridges with your centralized IT friends. And so, how do you do that? What could you invest in instead? Well, You could invest in some training on existing solutions that you have, whether it's um, for marketers, whether it's for a piece of your MarTech stack. Um, you could be taking a look at the various roles that you have and handoffs between centralized IT and marketers. And maybe you've identified a need for a new role or new roles to smoothen that transition and to kind of go back to that tenets of the promises of that original CDP vision. Anything that's going to help you improve that agility, the time to market. Maybe you need a look at an investment in your workflow. So again, how do those handoffs work? And how can you optimize those relationships? And what you'll probably find, which is what I found in that type of engagement is, well, there's some fantastic stuff here that the centralized IT teams have developed, but it's underutilized. Marketers aren't aware that it exists, and there may be an assumption that, well, marketers aren't interested or they don't have the appropriate skill set to utilize these things. And a lot of those gems or those investments that you might find, they might be part of investments that centralized data team has made with analytics platforms like Databrics, Snowflake, or the equivalent competing and complementary features from the hyperscalers. So you're likely to find some type of identity resolution, some golden customer records, those sorts of things. You're likely to find some capabilities they built to help aid segmentation, scoring, models. The challenge is that with those platforms, they're doing their best to appeal to a non-technical audience, and they may get there. But today, if you look at the history of an organization, let's pick a Databricks. If you've ever been to a Databricks conference, I can tell you there's very few marketers there in the traditional business sense. It is a data engineering fest and a data science fest. Developers, and that makes sense because that's where that organization, its history is from. It's coming from this world of open source, high throughput data pipelines. So really impressive stuff, but I don't care how many notebooks you have, how many lines of Python you have, or how many Spark clusters you can spool up, and how many rows can be processed. It really just doesn't help the marketer address that original problem, the original itch that we've been talking about, which is that responding to market needs and reacting. So it's not there. However, these platforms are a great place to build on top of. And you might be surprised that 80% or a significant portion of the solution that you've been looking for within a CDP is already there. And there are gaps. So let's be fair about that. So there's definitely gaps. Because of where these solutions are coming from, they are engineering first, as I mentioned. So you're not going to find appealing, visual, intuitive solutions, interfaces for marketers. But it doesn't mean that you can't add them. It doesn't mean that you can't use low code tools. It doesn't mean you can't build something bespoke to help solve that problem and kind of fill that gap, whether it's the 10% gap, the 20% gap, whatever it is. So what does that look like? At least in my case, I've built a career around taking those investments that are in the centralized teams, making marketing aware of what's there and how they can use it better. And yes, oftentimes it just isn't the right move to train a marketer on the way that problem is solved and the way it's maintained by a centralized IT team. You do need a developer skill set. You do need more of an architect perspective, a more technical audience to operate that. But where I've kind of split the difference is I'll say, okay, well, that's fine. Let's keep those engineers, those developers maintaining the slow part of the solution. So the part of the solution that doesn't need to change very, very rapidly. The pieces that are unlikely to require a rapid change because of the business reality. A campaign, is really underperforming, or there's a new brand, or competitors have done something. It's unlikely we need to change that part of the solution because of a new business reality that's going to happen, week to week or month to month. And then for anything that's more rapidly changing, you look into building some type of more palatable front end, which could look like custom UI. Of course, easier and easier to build those, at least prototype those today, thanks to AI, or building on some type of low-code tool. So is that kind of scary? Is it kind of uncertain? Well, yeah, it's not as simple as saying, well, I went to this really cool presentation from this CDP vendor and I went to their conference and they told me that it was going to solve world hunger. Okay, well, and everyone else is doing it. That's pretty easy to justify. So this is a little scarier because it requires some foresight. It requires an assessment of your landscape, assessment of your team, and sometimes a small investment in some type of user experience that's going to be palatable to marketers, which you may not get right. But if you do get it right, it's going to be laser focused on your needs. So that's my case for not buying a CDP and kind of growing up and making friends with your centralized teams, get a better understanding of what you really need. That's what I would spend my magic budget on. Let me know what you think. Post a comment, and you can expect from me some future rides where I'm talking about exactly that need of more palatable marketer experiences that are custom. And we'll talk about those sorts of themes in the next ride.